We're going to be talking about the Bell-LaPadula model. Just to get into a brief overview, the Bell-LaPadula model is a formal security model that we use to control access to classified information within computer systems. And essentially, the main theme of the Bell-LaPadula model is that we're focused on maintaining the confidentiality of objects. And objects in this case really just refers to things like files, data, documents, etc. And protecting confidentiality in this context means not allowing users that have a lower security level to access objects at a higher security level. Or, in other words, the Bell-LaPadula model prevents users from accessing information at a higher security level than what their own clearance allows for. This model ensures that classified information remains confidential by restricting access to it based on both the security levels of the data itself and also the users that are trying to access it. So just to get into the technical aspects or overview of it, essentially the way the Bell-LaPadula model works is objects, so files, data, documents, etc., are assigned security labels based on how sensitive the objects are. And those security labels might be things like top secret, secret, confidential, classified, unclassified, etc. And then once those objects are given one of those security labels, users are assigned security clearance levels that correspond to those labels that determine what information they can access. And the Bell-LaPadula model really follows two main rules that are pretty important to understand. Those are the simple security property and star property. The first rule about simple security essentially says that you can't read documents if you don't have a high enough classification level. So if you had a secret security clearance, then you could read documents that exist at that secret level. You can also read anything below it, so anything unclassified or any security label that is below the secret level, you could read those documents. But you couldn't read anything higher than that, so nothing at the top secret level or anything higher than that. So this simple security property rule is pretty easily intuitive to understand, and we call it the no read up rule because all it means is you can't read anything higher than your security label. But the second rule, star property, is a little bit more difficult to understand intuitively, but all it says is that you can't write documents that are lower than your classification level. So if you had a secret security clearance, you could write to the secret level, and you could write anything higher than your classification level, but you still can't read those documents that exist at a higher security level. You can just write to those categories. And this didn't make immediate intuitive sense to me, but when you think about it, it does. Like if someone was if someone had a secret security clearance, they might have access to sensitive information that we don't want people with lower security clearance levels to have access to. So if someone with a secret clearance was able to write down to lower security levels, they might have some secrets in their head that they might accidentally convey by writing down to those lower security levels. And those people at the lower levels might get access to that information, even if accidentally. So this star property rule essentially tries to avoid that problem by not allowing security levels to write down to lower levels. So the simple security property rule is called the no read up rule, and star property is called the no write down rule. And finally, the Bell-LaPadula model uses what's called mandatory access control. And this is really just where access to resources is determined by a central authority based on predefined rules, policies, and procedures, instead of things like individual user permissions. So the predefined rules, policies, and procedures in this context are the security labels and clearances that determine who gets access to what information. Here's a picture of how the Bell-LaPadula model works. As you can see, Bob in the middle has a secret clearance. He's able to read anything at that secret level or the confidential level below him, but he can't read anything at the top secret level. Similarly, he can't write down to the confidential level because he might have access to secret security information that we don't want to go down to the confidential level, but he can write up to the top secret level. In terms of historical development, the Bell-LaPadula model was originally created for the Department of Defense in 1973 in the middle of the Cold War and the Vietnam War. And this was really developed at a time where computer systems were starting to be used more frequently to process sensitive government and military data. And the US government kind of recognized that we needed a formal method to prevent unauthorized access to this classified information. So this model was developed to prevent those secrets from getting into the wrong hands at a time where computer systems were increasingly being used in sensitive areas like the military and government. In terms of strengths and weaknesses, there's certainly a lot of both. And the biggest strength is that it really does protect confidentiality, and it does so strictly, right? We have clear defined security levels for objects and security clearance levels for users. And that makes it easy to understand and somewhat easy to implement. And it really does protect information if that's what the goal is. And another strength is that it's really good for static systems, things where security levels aren't really changing frequently. We know what to expect. But that means that it's not so well suited for dynamic security environments, things that are like not like the military or government, where information can kind of change hands freely. Things change day to day, where people can have access to different sorts of information. So when things are changing, the rigidness of the Bell-LaPadula model isn't really a good thing and makes for a weakness. It also doesn't really address data integrity, so like anything about how accurate or how just accurate information is. All it does is really address just like who gets access to the information itself, not how integrous the data actually is. In terms of applicability, we kind of already covered this. It's used really primarily in military and government organizations, so those static environments that aren't really changing. It's really good for that, to protect that information. And we've also seen it used in some civilian areas as well, like banks and hospitals, where the confidentiality of data is really central to their business model. But just to briefly wrap up, we saw that the Bell-LaPadula model is a formal security model that's used to control access to classified information within computer systems. And we saw that its primary focus is on confidentiality, and where we want to ensure that information is only accessible to those that are authorized to view it. We saw that it's great for static environments, but it's not so great in dynamic environments. And yeah, we also kind of saw how it works, right? We aren't able to read up to higher security levels. We're not able to write down to lower security levels. And it really just depends on how we classify information and the security levels that security clearances that we give to individual users. But that's it. Thanks for watching.